Greetings, everyone. I'm Mar, and once again, this is my opinion. If you're living in a bubble and you haven't got a care, you're going to be in trouble because they're going to steal your air. Because what you got is what they need, and all they do is dirty deeds. They're the Spaceballs. And that is an apt way to begin this video, as I am covering, as you could guess, the 1987 film directed and partially starring Mel Brooks, Spaceballs. Good old MB's spoof of the space opera adventure genre. And mainly making fun of Star Wars, it also throws in some Flash Gordon spoofs, a little bit of Indiana Jones, some Alien for good measure, and it does it beautifully. While not my favorite of old Mel's films, it is in the running, and it is still an entertaining film to watch. Given that it's mainly a spoof of Star Wars, the plot is pretty straightforward to explain. On the planet Druidia, we have Princess Vespa, such an on-the-nose name if you get the joke, who is being forced to marry against her will. Her father, King Roland, is having her marry Prince Valium, who is the last prince left in the galaxy, which, although funny, does have me scratching my head a little bit. It's like, what happened to the rest of the families? Were they wiped out? This one of those gags about the European royal gene pool being so thin, and now we're down to the last two royal families. Just a little thought there. And he is well deserving of the name Valium because he's always like, blah, blah, blah. She runs away in such a comedic fashion with the preacher going right past the altar. She escapes out into space, but she picked the wrong time to run away from her wedding because the aforementioned titular Spaceballs plan to kidnap her in order to force her father to give them the combination to the shield around their planet so they can steal the air for planet Spaceball. Well, they try to kidnap her, but her father, King Roland, made a deal with two heroes, or I put heroes there. They become heroes as the film goes on. We have Lone Star, played by Bill Pullman, and Barf, played by the late John Candy, who are essentially spoofs of Han Solo and Chewbacca, although with Lone Star there is a little bit of Indiana Jones sprinkled in there, so we got two Harrison Ford spoofs for the price of one. They save her, some hijinks ensue with a crash landing, they gotta go back and resave her in a spoof of the famous Death Star escape scene. We get a lightsaber fight spoof. There's a bunch of other spoofs mixed in, and they eventually destroy the Spaceball weapon. You know, you got to get in a parody of the Death Star explosion in there somehow. And in the end, evil is defeated, love is realized, and our heroes go off into the sunset. Not literally, because it's space, but got to use that cliche somehow. Direction-wise, Mel does actually a pretty good job. He's always good behind the camera. Shots are set up well. What he's spoofing, he does is do his research on. And since he is in front of the camera in two roles here, he does manage to go back and forth with the duties pretty well. One of my favorite non-special effects camera shots is when he's running through the hall as President Scrooge and the camera pans. It's like, salute. If I walk, the movie would be over. And of course, in front of the camera, he has one of my favorite lines of the film. Never have that damn thing down in front of me. How do I know you're making faces at me in front of that thing? And he has a good chemistry with the rest of the cast. Funny thing about his characters is that Yogurt is obviously a spoof of Yoda, and a pretty good one. Mel really showed his dedication to the character because he had an allergic reaction to the makeup, and he still persevered and went through. Of course, he had to alternate when he filmed those scenes, because you're not going to do it back-to-back unless you want to risk a major reaction. Persevere, and it's on screen. We don't really see him walk a lot. There's like two moments where you can see him walk, because he has to be on his knees, and I can imagine that hurt after a bit, but Mel suffered, and it's on screen. Now, as President Scrooge, his character is obviously a parody of Emperor Palpatine from Star Wars, but the thing I find interesting, and I only realized this on the drive home today while I was musing on what I was going to say in this video, his character is also kind of a spoof on the initial concept of Emperor Palpatine. If any of you have not read the original novelization for Star Wars Episode 4, or read about some of the initial ideas Lucas had before he started doing the later films, originally the Emperor was not going to be unlimited power. He wasn't going to be a Sith Lord or anything like that. He was going to be an average politician, worked his way up, became what at that point was the president of the Republic. He eventually became the Supreme Chancellor and then evolved into the Emperor role. Originally, he was going to be controlled by other politicians, and Vader just viewed him as a means to an end, kind of like how Colonel Sanders and Lord Helmet in this film view President Scrooge. So in that regard, he's spoofing the original concept. But then it evolved into the Emperor concept. But the thing I like about that is that in the novelization, Vader even has a thing where they do a mock celebration of the Emperor. To the Emperor. I can imagine at one point, without President Scrooge being present, Lord Helmet doing that. To President Scrooge. Oh, Dark Helmet, he's right behind you. Speaking of Dark Helmet, Rick Moranis plays that role perfectly. I mean, you could have gone the traditional route and done a Darth Vader spoof where it's what we expect, as later stuff would do. I mean, they did a spoof of Darth Vader like that on Rocko's Modern Life, but instead, they portrayed his spoof as a bumbling idiot. Which at first, he's still very formidable. I mean, the scene where they spoof the Force powers and they also spoof the power ring of Ming the Merciless at the same time. Just the reaction of all of his subordinates, especially the one he punishes. He's like, oh crap, no, yes, that. And then of course the alternating voice with the helmet down. He has a bass voice like Vader, a la James Earl Jones. Colonel Sanders, may I speak with you, please? And the moment it goes up, it's Moranis' normal voice. Nice little contrast there, where he has it down when he really wants to seem intimidating, and then when he's just being his normal self, it up. And then, of course, when they're out on the planet Vega, in the safari cap, and with the shorts, that just adds to it. And the fun thing is, Moranis ad-libbed one of my favorite moments in the film, and that's when Lord Helmet is playing with the toys. Not so fast, Helmet. Lone Star. And it's the only time in the movie where he uses the bass voice without his helmet down. And I just love that. That wasn't even in the script. It's an idea they came up with on the fly, and it works pretty well. Bill Pullman and John Candy as Barf and Lone Star, they have an excellent chemistry. I don't know if they made any other movies before or after this together, but if not, that's kind of a shame, because they do have a pretty good chemistry. It would have been nice to see them in more roles together. You definitely believe them as longtime friends. The spoof of Chewbacca and Han is very evident, but unlike with Chewie, we actually understand Barf. And him being a Mog is an interesting idea. We do see some of the dog tendencies come in, like when they're on the moon of Vega, the tongue coming out. He's very loyal to Lone Star as well, so that's another dog comment. And people always make the joke about Chewie being the dog, or since Wookiees have long lives, that I guess his human companion is like a dog to him. So they were going with that idea and spoofing it to its logical conclusion. And they have a lot of good back and forth lines together. And originally, the Mog makeup they were going to put on John Candy was going to be a lot more dog, like bulldog-ish, but then they tinkered with it, and they're like, if we got John Candy for this role, why are we going to put him under a lot of makeup? Would have been interesting to see that initial concept, but just a spot over the eye. Nice little thing, nice little tribute to the old Little Rascals shorts. Plus, that combined with the ears and the tail, it gives the Mog concept its own otherworldly, semi-alien aspect while still being human-esque. And it ties into the near-human concept from the Star Wars mythos, where there are aliens that have like different colored skins, like tentacles and all that, but they're close enough to humans that they can interbreed with them, and they're not too alien. Then we go further down, you get more ones that are less human, that are really alien, so it's like one step away. Of course, Bill Pullman plays off the... damn it. Bill Pullman plays off the Han Solo, Indiana Jones-esque hero pretty well. There's a little bit of Luke Skywalker in that too, since he is the one that uses the Force parody, the Schwartz, which is kind of funny because later on when they did Clone Wars, they told the actor who eventually voiced Anakin to play the character like a mix of Luke and Han, so this was a mix of Luke and Han before it was cool. You definitely believe him as that rogue type character, but you see that there is a little bit of mysteriousness about his background that even he doesn't know about. Of course, funny thing in Legends, finds out that he is descended from the House of Solo, and then of course in the new ones he doesn't even know who his people are, so a little bit of funniness there regarding the character he's spoofing. Of course, here it's meant to tie into the fact that he's, related somehow to something else, because they didn't go all the way with the Luke Vader parody. They just parody the importance of the "I am your father" line from Empire later on with the "I am your father's brother's nephew's cousin's former roommate. Absolutely nothing." Just the ridiculousness, and they made it super convoluted. And of course, we find out he's a prince. Ties into that thing I mentioned about love earlier on. He ends up taking the princess, which their love story is a little rushed, I will admit. But I think that is partially due to the fact there is some Flash Gordon parody going on, and the relationship in that film seems a little forced. Mainly because they cut the original backstory that they were going to put between those two, where they had a fling before, and this is like them be getting reacquainted with one another. And also, in their main spoof of Star Wars, they have to narrow down the timeline and fit 3 films worth of stuff into one film that they're using. So it is a little forgivable, and plus there's chemistry between them, and in the film's own internal logic, it gets Vespa away from a prince she doesn't like with one that she more or less likes. And plus, if it turns out that they're not fully compatible, as Dot Matrix says, you can just marry him for your father's sake and have a headache for the next 25 years. Speaking of Vespa, Daphne Zaninga, she plays the part well. She comes across as a spoiled prima donna early on, but as the film goes, she grows a little bit. Definitely can believe her as a badass, especially in that scene where she shoots all the Spaceballs soldiers. You definitely see they sprinkled in the Princess Leia spoof in there with her, so you believe that. She has a good chemistry with Bill Pullman, which is why their love story does work, even if it is, from a timeline perspective, very, very condensed. But you definitely do believe it. It seems like from the 3 Star Wars films, they're pulling mainly from Empire with what they're using as inspiration, along with a little bit of that aforementioned Flash Gordon spoof influence. Dick Van Patten plays her father, King Roland. He's only in a couple scenes, but he steals those scenes a little bit. Definitely believe him as a royal. Really loves his daughter, cares for her, will do anything to make sure she's safe. But he's going to follow tradition and make her marry a prince, even if she doesn't love him. Of course, he would appear in a later Mel Brooks film as the Abbot. I hate that guy. The late Joan Rivers provides the voice of Dot Matrix, which her name alone is a spoof of a printer from that time period, but it's just computery sounding enough to where you can believe it is the name of a cyborg. And of course, she's a spoof of C-3PO. She's not as posh as the person she's spoofing, but believable in a different way as the friend of a princess. And then, of course, Joan Rivers' voice, you definitely believe it. And they modeled the face after her, so it complements that pretty well. Of course, she's involved in one of the biggest gags in the film, and that's the Virgin alarm. I just love that sight gag, although it does kind of contradict the little things she mentions earlier about Lone Star possibly being cute because of his sexy voice. But there's a difference between complimenting him on his looks and letting the princess who she's guarding be deflowered by this handsome rogue, as one might put it. George Weiner plays Colonel Sanders very well. He has a decent chemistry with Rick Moranis, so you believe him as our Vader Satire's commanding officer. And he is definitely inspired by a lot of the Imperial officers that we see in the Star Wars films. Seems mainly to be a takeoff of a little bit of Tarkin, just not as elegant, and a little bit of Admiral Piet from Empire, and also less competent than that admiral. Of course, his name is obvious. I mean, they even make a joke about it in the film. What's the matter, Colonel Sanders? Chicken? And of course, his first words sound like a chicken squawk before he composes himself. And of course, he seems to be a little bit more competent at times than Lord Helmet, but I think that's part of the gag, that he is the highest ranking normal officer that we see until we get to Lord Helmet, and yet he gets pushed down a little bit. I'm surprised that we don't see a general or an admiral. All we see is a colonel. The only other Officers we see is Major Asshole, which they carry that gag to its logical conclusion. I knew it, I'm surrounded by assholes. And then a captain who they remain unnamed. He's just captain of the guard, which leads to one of my other favorite gags. You've captured the stunt doubles! Other than that, it seems to be all enlisted men. Although it makes me wonder, if you're on a ship, why are you using Army and Marine ranks instead of Navy ranks? Shouldn't it be Chief Petty Officer Rico, Captain Sanders? But you lose some of the gags, I guess, if you use the Navy ranks, and not just me spitballing and nitpicking at this point. Longtime Mel Brooks collaborator John Morris composed the score. He's worked with him on a lot of films. He worked on Blazing Saddles, worked on The Elephant Man, among others. And it is an excellent score. And the reason it works is because it does not sound like a spoof score. If you're familiar with Star Wars, you know that it's spoofing Star Wars. But the thing is, if you were to just hear this score independently of the film without having any knowledge of Spaceballs whatsoever, it sounds like the score for a legit space opera. Like you'd probably say a Star Wars ripoff, but it sounds like a score for a legit film. And I think that's the reason it works, is because it complements and contrasts with the images we see on screen. We're seeing ridiculousness on screen, seeing a dollar store Darth Vader fighting the Han Solo Indiana Jones allegory stand-in. That's a better one. Seeing ridiculous stuff, and yet the score is serious. I mean, there's a few times where it gets a little jokey, but for the most part it's serious, and the main theme is a good thing of that. And of course, the Imperious Forces, which is what the Spaceballs call themselves, their main theme is a parody of the Jaws theme. That's where I say it gets a little ridiculous, but it's just sinister enough to where it's believable. I'm surprised they didn't do a parody of the Imperial March, but I guess they figured to go with another parody because of the sight gag involving the ship. And then, of course, that theme I quoted at the beginning, the Spaceballs theme we see during the self-destruct sequence scene. It's a great song. Even though Mel technically did not need his blessing, considering this is a spoof which is protected under fair use, Mel did approach George Lucas about the idea of spoofing the film, and George said he was fine with it under one condition, and that was no merchandise be produced for the film. Which is why merchandising is one of the gags within the film, and it's also one of my favorite gags. Merchandising, where the real money from the movie is made. And the stuff is mainly props, although a couple of things like that's Transformers, but it goes with it. And of course, he was so tickled by some of the stuff in the screenplay that he actually had Industrial Light and Magic help make the film. So, in a way, it's kind of a self-parody, because Lucas and his team are helping Mel make fun of the films, but it also shows that George does have a sense of humor. And the fact that he loved the film just shows that. It's just like Hitchcock with High Anxiety. Mel showed him that. Hitch walked out without a word afterwards, and then Mel's like, oh crap, did I offend him? Then he got a letter and some wine later saying, good job. So Hitch liked it. Shows Hitch had a sense of humor as well. Because they say imitation is the most sincere form of flattery. And if you're spoofing something but with love and not disdain, the person should love it, as long as they have a good sense of humor. Of course, Industrial Light and Magic, they helped with the alien puppet, which of course, what makes that scene work is the fact they got John Hurt for it, who delivers his line, "Oh no, not again." Of course, he did it from free, according to IMDb. He said if he knew how long that scene was going to take to film, he would have asked for a little bit of a salary. Of course, it's the second time Hurt worked with Mel Brooks. First time was playing Jesus in History of the World Part 1, and one of my favorite little line gags. Jesus! What? Nothing. Jesus! What? Nice little moment there. And Industrial Light and Magic also helped with the lightsaber stuff, where it's the ring battle, which is one of my favorite little moments because of the gags with it, including the meta joke of attacking the film crew. He did it. Which, of course, that scene also contains not only one of my favorite lines in the film, but a line that is very true when you look at certain films and how the good and bad interact. You see, Lone Star, evil will always triumph because good is dumb. Well, not in this film, he's not, with how he ends up defeating Lord Helmet. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, know what I mean? Say no more. While it's meant to tie into the fact that the Dinks are obvious parodies of the Seven Dwarves, the line the Lone Star says as he wakes up is kind of prophetic, considering that Disney did buy out Star Wars from George Lucas, and that line, of course, is, "Did I miss something? When did we get to Disneyland?" Just one of those things in retrospect. The line's still funny, but it takes on a new meaning as new people discover the film and watch it as the years go by. On the whole, Spaceballs is a very entertaining film. It spoofs Star Wars and the other sci-fi adventure films with love and care, while taking the right shots when necessary. Tweaks the concept a little bit. The score plays it straight and helps contrast the images on screen beautifully. The actors all commit to the roles, making them very believable. All wrapped up nice and tight, just like a good space opera is. All makes for a fun viewing experience. Now, I sadly never had the chance to see this one. Out of all of Mel Brooks' films, this is probably one that I would love to see in theaters. I mean, I'd love to see The Producers, Blazing Saddles, and Young Frankenstein, the latter two being my favorite Mel Brooks films, in theaters. But just from the film's look standpoint, this would be one I'd love to see, just to see the Star Wars spoof scenes up on the big screen, to be able to admire the special effects. For the rewatch for this video, I watched it in HD for the first time and was able to admire the stuff more. Noticed a couple things I had never noticed with the DVD version, like, oh, I didn't notice you have the animation of Lone Star and Barf walking across the thing. I never noticed it was like that before. Noticing how good the special effects look just on the big screen, it would look even more amazing. If you are a fan of Star Wars, sci-fi in general, and you've not seen Spaceballs, I say give it a watch. Even if you're not a fan of Mel Brooks' style of spoof, I say still give it a watch. You might gain an appreciation for Mel's style.